also the drug addicts during this lockdown. Yes, we've noticed an exponential increase in, yes, alcohol use and other drugs during this strict COVID-19 lockdown. I do have Helena Okering. She is the Executive Director of Blue Cross Uganda. She joins me right now to talk about how dire this situation is. She joins me via Zoom. There she is. A very good morning, Helena Okering. How are you doing? How is Blue Cross Uganda?
Good morning to you, Romeo. Thank you for holding.
An exponential increase in the number of people who are using alcohol during this COVID-19 lockdown because of the psychological stress that is being brought about by the same, which is the COVID-19 lockdown and so forth. I still do have Helena Okering. We've just re-established that connection. A very good morning, Madame Okering Helena. How are you doing?
I'm very good, Romeo. Good morning to you. Good morning, viewers.
Indeed.
Greetings from Blue Cross Uganda.
All right.
An organization that works to promote mental health awareness, life skills, and prevent drug and alcohol abuse amongst young people.
How dire is this situation in Uganda?
So across the continent, Uganda and Namibia are the highest consumers of alcohol on the African continent. So that should give you a sense of how dire the situation is. We are topping on the continent for not so good reasons. During lockdown, the increase, I think there was a police report, a police statement released last month that estimated about a 40% increase in alcohol abuse due to lockdown situations. Yeah, so it's quite dire.
Indeed. What about the psychological stress that is being wrought on these drug addicts during this COVID-19 lockdown?
Okay, so psychological stress is a driver of alcohol abuse, and we can all understand how emotionally daunting and psychologically stressful lockdowns have been. You know, disruptions in the school calendar, disruptions for some in, you know, their work schedules has created different kinds of stress, from job loss, from wondering if I'll go back to school. So that, you know, that creates, or that sort of creates anxieties that different people cope with differently. Unfortunately, some of us cope by abusing alcohol. Yeah.
Of course, Mrs. Okering, it is very hard to talk about drug abuse or alcohol abuse without talking about poverty in the same sentence. Am I right?
Yes, yes, you are right, Romeo. When we abuse alcohol, we tend to spend most of our incomes on it. And once you are spending your incomes on dealing with an addiction of whatever sort, it means you have less left to save or to spend on income generating activities, or even look after your own health and livelihood. Collectively, ignoring those things, you know, leads to situations of poverty, because you're not creating wealth, you're not saving, you're not using your money for things that are otherwise constructive for your economic livelihood. So yes, you end up in a situation of poverty.
Well, of course, I cannot alienate my people who are poor. Also, rich people who have a lot of money are also suffering drug abuse, alcohol abuse, if you will. They are drinking left, right, and center, despite the fact they do have the money. What could be the driving factor behind that, if it's not poverty?
Okay, so for any drug that we abuse, whether it's methadone, whether it's cocaine, nobody simply abuses drugs for the sake of it. We have come to learn that there's always an underlying factor. All right. So maybe you have, you know, a life issue you are not dealing with. It could be you went through abuse as a child. It hasn't been addressed. The trauma from that hasn't been addressed. So it lingers into your adulthood, and to cope with that, you abuse drugs and alcohol. For some people, it's just stress, different things that are causing stress. So it's unlikely that people just abuse alcohol or drugs for the sake of it. There's usually an underlying issue that is unaddressed. Yeah.
Well, of
So
course,
and that could cut across. Yeah.
well, of course, Elena Okering, in other countries that we were looking at as morning at NTV, we did notice that the most affected age group are the young people, are the youth. Now, looking at
That's true.
Uganda's, perspective, who is affected the most? Are they the adults or the young people?
Of course, because of Uganda's demographic construct, we're seeing an increase in the numbers of young people who are abusing drugs and alcohol. And we gave explanations earlier. Of course, there's the whole lockdown stress, but also if you look at, for example, some of our lifestyles. Right now, universities are closed, but we have done research to show universities are some of the key entry points for people to either get initiated or escalate their use of drugs and alcohol. So yes, young people, university populations are struggling the most with abusing drugs and alcohol.
Well, Helena Okering, here is another callous development that we do know as morning at NTV is that the young people who are using alcohol the most are the most affected when it comes to alcohol itself. The consumption is affecting their brain cells and so forth compared to their adults. Compound more on
That is
that.
actually true. That is actually true, Romeo and our viewers. You see, alcohol does affect brain development. However, for younger people, the chances of brain development being affected are higher because your brain, for example, the brain of a young person continues developing way into their teenage years and early adulthood. So up to about 20 years, up to about the age of 20 years, your brain is still going through development. So if you start to abuse alcohol from as early as, say, 13, 14, 15, then it's definitely going to affect your brain development more than it would somebody who has begun to use alcohol later on in their life, say 21 plus. So it means and of course, with damaged brain cells, you have challenges like impaired memory, you struggle to remember, your motor coordination also gets affected, and that's important for skills like driving. If you want to be a border rider, if you want to drive, you need that kind of motor coordination. So if your brain cells get affected earlier on in life, you struggle with that. You also struggle with things like memory blackouts. You just you just fail to remember. And of course, the more obvious ones like slurred speech. So you find, your speech begins to slur. You don't speak as eloquently as you could if you did
Indeed.
not abuse alcohol.
And of course, Elena Okering, this is a callous development because our learners are largely at home and we're saying it's the youth who are engaged in this abusive behavior, meaning the learners who are supposed to be in school are the ones abusing these drugs, are the ones using more of this alcohol, meaning the cognitive abilities are being affected. Do you envisage a situation whereby they go back to the school setting and they can't even they don't even have that ability to actually learn in the classroom? Their cognitive abilities have been affected by the alcohol itself.
Okay, so generally speaking, the COVID situation has, turned a lot of things on their head. Right now, it's hard to tell heads from tails on anything.
Indeed.
So even for education, it's really speculative. In the event that, we go back to life as it were, which is, unlikely. Of course, you cannot underestimate the impact of abusing drugs and alcohol. Certainly, a big number, up to 40% of learners could be absent from schools for different reasons. Girls who have abused alcohol have been known to contract STIs, HIV/AIDS, early unplanned pregnancies. So, of course, that could contribute to their absence. from schools. For men, for young men, once you are struggling with an addiction, it's hard for you to focus on your education. So even just being present in class, certainly there'll definitely be effects that we will, appreciate as time goes on and as we attempt to return to some semblance of normalcy. Thank you.
Very, very insightful conversation I'm having with Helena Okering, the Executive Director of Blue Cross Uganda, on the skyrocketing cases of drug abuse during this lockdown, especially alcohol abuse. Now, Helena Okering, let's talk about another issue. How best can we help these young people who are grappling all the same during this lockdown, who have fallen prey to this vice? How do we help them?
Okay, so all right. So first of all, it's important to acknowledge that all of us are struggling. I have, I have recovered from mental health illness due to lockdown stress. So all of us are struggling in some form, and it's important to acknowledge that. Now, when we acknowledge that, then we are able to empathize with young people. So it's so important to create opportunities for young people to talk about the psychological stress they are dealing with. That's very important. It's also important to provide information on how to cope. We have said, alcohol abuse is driven by different things. So in as much as it is tough, find out what is the real reason that you are abusing alcohol. And in as much as possible, try to address that. If the issue is you are afraid that, maybe you don't know what life will be, find out what the facts are. Yes, it's, things are scary for all of us, but we will get through this. You've come this far, chances are you will overcome. Also, it's important for young people to keep hope alive. You have a future that is still worth fighting for. So reminding young people of their potential, doing things that speak to your possibility. So learning a new skill, staying away from peer pressure that encourages you to abuse drugs and alcohol is something that will help you. The other thing I want to commend government for is government has been putting out messages that have been speaking to, your mental health, your mental well-being, and as well as other actors. So we've seen a lot of young people showing leadership during this season and doing campaigns on promoting mental health awareness. We've seen Twitter chats on promoting mental health awareness. All of those things provide you with information and knowledge that can help you to safeguard your mind. Once your mind is in the right place, once you have hope, once you believe you have a future,
Indeed.
once you are applying your energies constructively, chances are you are less likely to take on habits that compromise the bright future that you have.
Indeed, Helena.
Yes.
Helena, the parents are watching, the religious leaders are watching, government is watching, and they are wondering, what role can we play to help alleviate this challenge?
All right. So thank you very much for that, Romeo. So religious institutions, parents, please provide spaces and time in your programming to speak specifically to young people, to speak hope to them, to encourage them, to listen. Many times we talk at young people as opposed to listening to them. You will be surprised at how much you can, divert or prevent someone from taking alcohol by simply listening to them. So we take to the bottle when we have bottled up issues. So when you create a platform where those issues can come out, then it's easy to encourage someone not to take to other avenues of coping, such as alcohol abuse. So please create time on your programs whenever you're giving a sermon. Give 1 minute to encourage young people. Take a minute or two to encourage them not to abuse drugs. Take a minute or two to speak to the issues. Invite them. If you're going to preach a sermon, ask them as young people,
Indeed.
what is it that you would like us to speak to, so that your sermon is actually meeting actual psychosocial needs. If people are stressed, speak to that. If people are wondering, what life will be, speak hope to that.
Indeed.
And importantly, create room for conversation.
Helena Okering, before I let you go, let's talk about the biggest stakeholder in all this, and that is the community, Helena Okering. and stigmatization has been meted out on these addicts. You have so many people who are, heckling them, saying you will not amount to anything. So meaning many of them regress when they are making some progress because of the stigmatization. How dire is stigmatization when it comes to negating the ability of the drug addicts to actually pull through?
Okay, so stigma is a very serious issue. I mean, we don't even have to say much about it. It's
I hear
quite
you.
serious. And stigma has the effect of, like you have said, discouraging people who are otherwise, trying to do something about addiction. And it also prevents people from asking for help. Actually, that's the worst effect of stigma. Stigma makes you ashamed to say, I need help, I am struggling. So yes, it is a serious situation. And, stigma comes up in different ways. If you're the kind of person who's, for example, we're speaking to leaders, if all the time you are giving examples
All
about
right.
people who are struggling with addiction and you are shaming them, shaming, meaning, making cruel comments about them, humiliating them, they are less likely to come out of that addiction, because by
Indeed.
doing that, you are adding psychological stress to
All
them.
right, Helena.
So it's so important to encourage people to speak out. Let's not shame addicts who come out to say they need help. Let's encourage them. Let's create space in our homes.
All
All
right.
of us are at home now. Yeah, create space where, we can speak openly about this thing and not fight stigma.
Very insightful conversation. Helena Okering, you couldn't have been so spot on with that conversation. Thank you very much for having made the time to speak to us. Kind regards to everyone
you,
at Blue Cross
Romeo.
Uganda.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
And of course, many thanks to our viewers who have been watching this show from 6:30 a.m. up to now. We do not take that love and support lightly. And to the kings and queens, boys and girls who are celebrating their birthdays on this particular day, would wish you a joyous one, but be cognizant of the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic is still pretty much, you guessed it, rearing its very ugly head.
Yes.
My name is Romeo Busiku. Let's do this again tomorrow, same time, 6:30 a.m.